Is that what we're talking about? But let's talk about the aid to Ukraine. Here in the news, we're just finding out about the situation with FTX and the cryptocurrency. So is American people's taxpayer dollars going to fund aid in Ukraine, but yet it's really funding something else that's happening, maybe ending up in Democrat donors' pockets? Was that helping Democrat campaigns? Was that helping Democrat candidates get elected? $8.9 billion is for the humanitarian assistance, including emergency food and assistance for Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees in the region and for other countries directly impacted by the conflict. Again, what other countries? And how much money went to the other countries? And what organizations are involved? Who runs these organizations? And why did they get the contracts? $11.8 billion in other assistance, including for direct budget support to Ukraine and development aid and other assistance to Ukraine and other affected countries. What development aid? What assistance? Who is running this? These are all the questions the American people have. Now, here, think about it like this. Separately from congressional appropriations, the Biden administration has already committed $17.6 billion in security assistance directly to Ukraine since the start of the war just this year. It's been about 10 months. The Biden administration has also authorized 23 drawdowns, that's selling weapons and equipment, under the Presidential Drawdown Authority since August of 2021 for a total value of $10.6 billion. Now let's compare that, all of this, to what our border receives. Our Border Patrol asks for $15.46 billion to secure the border of the United States. President Trump's border wall would have only cost $22 billion. With the money we've sent to Ukraine, we could have already secured our border, but we're not doing that. We're ignoring the dangers happening at our border and the national security crisis that's happening in our country while we are completely protecting another country's border and also waging a proxy war with Russia. We had 5 million people cross our border illegally since Joe Biden took office. And let's compare that to how many Russians have invaded Ukraine. 82,000 Russians have invaded Ukraine. I think the American people and the taxpayers of this country deserve to know why the Biden administration and this Congress is so interested in funding the protection of Ukraine's border and not the protection of our border. That's a very good question. I also want it to be known that approximately 56,000 Americans die every single year from fentanyl poisoning. This is a tragedy that's happening, and it's practically invisible. Now, while we have injured Ukrainian soldiers walking the halls of Congress, and I just saw them today, and they're being paraded around. It's tragic and heartbreaking to see these men. They've been injured in this war, a war that America should not be participating in, but they're used as pawns to talk people like us into funding the protection of Ukraine's border, but not the protection of our border. And that is extremely wrong. But all the families that lost loved ones, 56,000 a year Americans dying from fentanyl, we don't see them walking the halls of Congress. And that's tragic. Now, our job is to use the American taxpayers' dollars for our country and for the security of our border and for Americans, but that's completely being ignored. So what this resolution will do, let me explain it. It's a privilege resolution, so I entered it in today. Now, they have 14 days to decide what they're going to do with it. Those are days we're in session. And then, if they make no decision, I can force this resolution to the House floor for a vote. And guess what Congress gets to decide? If the committees say they want nothing to do with it and refuse to tell the American taxpayers and the people of this country that they will not show transparency and provide all of the information that I'm demanding and my colleagues here are demanding, and we're asking for everything to do with military, civilian, and financial aid. We want it all. If they refuse to be transparent, then I'll be pushing this to the floor for a vote. And then if Congress votes this down, guess what the message will be to the American people? It will be, you don't get to find out what's happening with your money. They'll be telling the American people no. And I think that is a very bad message to tell the American people when it comes to the security of our border, the protection and safety of American citizens, especially when being compared to a foreign country, a country that's not a member of NATO, a country that should be being told to negotiate for peace and end this war, and a country that our American military, our American taxpayers should not be funding. By the way, we're funding their budget too. Did you know that? We're funding Ukraine's budget with $11.8 billion is going to assistance, including for direct budget support. The question is Ukraine now the 51st state of the United States of America? And what position does Zelensky have in our government? This is outrageous, and the American people deserve answers. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend from Kentucky, Thomas Massie.
Thank you, Marjorie. Marjorie did a great job of going through what we think all the money is going to, or what they say all the money is going to. This resolution is about finding out exactly where that money has gone. The American support, American voters, taxpayer support for what we're doing in Ukraine is withering. There have been 18 to 19 votes on this issue of Ukraine in the last year. It's getting hard to count, though, now because they don't have individual votes on this money. In the beginning, if we were going to rattle a saber or impose a sanction that actually hurts Americans as much or more than it would hurt Russia or do anything to have an effect on this war, they would have an individual vote. And when the last time they had an individual vote was on roughly $40 billion, there were 56 members of Congress who voted against that. But the support has eroded since then among Americans, so much to the point that the last time Pelosi passed this money, she connected it, and I think this is really despicable. She connected it to the disaster relief to Florida. Think about that. In order to provide relief to people who were victims of a disaster in Florida, you had to increase the chance of nuclear disaster by sending money to Ukraine and throwing fuel on this fire. She plans to do the same thing again, I hear. We're not going to have an up or down vote on whether to send more taxpayer dollars to Ukraine. She's going to include it with response to viruses and response to more tropical storms and hurricanes. It's all going to be in there so that if you don't vote for this, then she will go out and have a press conference like she did last time and say, well, Republicans didn't vote to help these people. I want to put out some numbers here for you so you can compare what we're talking about, the amount of money that we're talking about. We're talking about billions, not millions. And I've been fact-checked on this, so don't bother fact-checking it now. It's survived the fact-check. We've spent more in Ukraine, the U.S. Congress has, than we spend on all of our roads and bridges in an entire year. The entire infrastructure of this country, the roads and bridges, the real infrastructure. We don't spend as much on that here as we've spent on Ukraine in 9 months. I think that's despicable. Our priorities are all out of whack. And I'll finish with this. We're trying to get the documents here to find out where the money went. What we really need is a full audit. I hope when we take the majority, we will get a full audit. We need an inspector general. In Afghanistan, we were spending about $50 billion a year, $50 billion a year. John Sopko was the special inspector general of Afghan reconstruction there, because also they call it reconstructive money, they call it military money, just like Ukraine. It's all a big pool of money. And the waste, fraud, and abuse in Afghanistan was epic. Every report that he put out showed that our money was being wasted and going to fraud. And they know if they get an inspector general who has the credentials of somebody like John Sopko, we're going to find the same thing in Afghanistan. And it's high time to stop sending any more money. Don't send another penny to Ukraine, and to start auditing where the money went. And with that, I'll turn it over to my good friend from Florida, Matt Gaetz.
I'm here as a member of the House Armed Services Committee to say that the days of endless cash and military materiel to Ukraine are numbered. They're numbered in the days that are required to act on Congresswoman Greene's well-thought-out resolution of inquiry, and they are numbered when we get into the majority. I will not vote for one more dollar to Ukraine. I will not vote for one more piece of materiel to Ukraine. We are far too entangled in this conflict. I believe we have extended this conflict. And I call on the Secretary of Defense to declassify the Inspector General report on the compliance with our existing regulations regarding chain of custody with materiel going to another country. There is a report now. You all can't read it. The American people can't read it. But I wish the American people could see the extent to which our laws have been violated, our regulations have been ignored when it comes to the end-to-end chain of custody that we are supposed to have for this equipment. I've heard from constituents who've been downrange, who've said that they see some of the most exquisite American military equipment being scattered about Ukraine without true accountability and without a measure of whether or not it's going into the fight in a righteous way. The American people are not going to support this war without review, without asking tough questions, and the incoming Republican majority should not and will not. And I now yield to my friend from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Thank you. Thank you to my friend from Florida. You know, I believe the total lack of oversight into Ukraine funding is actually very dangerously deliberate. And I say that, you know, we had an oversight hearing, an oversight briefing this morning, and we talked about evidence. Well, you know, I think this might be a little bit of evidence right here, too. Back in July, I offered an amendment to the NDAA to establish an inspector general for Ukrainian military aid to oversee the billions of taxpayer dollars that are being sent to Ukraine by this government in defense of Ukraine's sovereignty. You know, I wish that amount of money would have gone to our southern border in defense of our sovereignty, but that wasn't the case. It went to Ukraine's border. But this is what it was, this amendment right here, to the NDAA. It was voted down in the Rules Committee by the Democrats. They don't want an inspector general. There's billions of dollars going to Ukraine and no inspector general. It's a slap in the face to the American people for Washington to continue to squander billions on protecting the sovereignty of foreign borders while intentionally not defending ours. You know, with the troubling revelations and legitimate questions that have emerged regarding Ukraine funding with FTX, it's essential that we provide the American people with the transparency that they deserve and prioritize the well-being of our constitutional republic and not someone else's. You know, I'm proud to join Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene in this Ukraine funding inquiry in the pursuit of answers, accountability, and justice for the American people. And with that, I yield back to Congresswoman Greene. Oh,
Let's go for Barry.
All right, Barry, you're up. To my friend from Alabama.
Thank you, sir. Sorry I'm late. I was in Ukraine before Afghanistan fell. And at that point in time, the Parliament was extremely concerned about our energy policy and how we were allowing Putin to move and basically move the pipeline and start production. And so at that time, even then, the Parliament saw the issues. But when I got here and began to talk to other members, they're like, the same group of people here gave Trump such a hard time about a few $1 billion for the U.S. southern border. As fentanyl and drugs and illegals pour across our southern border, a few $1 billion, $4 billion, was just a little too much money. And now we're looking at $40 billion one week, $14 billion the next week, with little to no oversight. Ukraine is a young democracy, and we're sending American taxpayer money over there with no oversight. It creates problems, it creates corruption, and it's not good for the American taxpayer or the American people. So with that, I yield back, but thank you, Marjorie. I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. And I'd like to introduce one of our newly elected freshman members of Congress that'll be joining us in January, Corey Mills from Florida. Corey.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add to what Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of our colleagues have said. We are stewards of the American taxpayers' money. We are supposed to be looking at not just transparency, but accountability for how these things are being spent. For far too long, we've had fiscal irresponsibility that's led to the $31 trillion in our debt and a potential fall in our actual economic strength. We need to be looking at not just being interventionist, but being protectionist, protecting our own borders, protecting Americans here at home, and protecting our constitutionality. We should not go around thinking that we are always the world's police and have the answers. As we've seen, we're now at a nuclear escalation where the ideas of tactical nuclear missiles are being threatened by the Russians. We need to think about the geopolitical alignments between Russia, China, Iran, what that means for us with this axis of evil. But we also need to be able to hold those accountable. As many of us know, the Russians had continued to assemble on the borders. And what did China do? Chairman Xi actually delayed the invasion so he could continue his Olympic trials. If he has that type of capability, then why aren't we talking about de-escalation of this, utilizing a mediator, whether that be through the EU or China themselves, to actually stop not just America's involvement in this, but stop the continual escalation from our funding of this? We need to start looking at what Chairman Xi is trying to accomplish here. This is not about kinetics. This is about the economic resource warfare that has been launched against the West. We need to think about the One Road, One Belt initiative that Chairman Xi is eagerly and aggressively trying to attack by expanding the Eurasian border, taking Africa, taking Oceania, recreating a maritime Silk Route, cutting off Western Hemisphere supply chain, and attacking the U.S. dollar as the global currency. This is their ultimate goal. And the way for us to defeat that and hold our adversaries accountable, in my opinion, is to invest here at home, to protect our southern borders, to look at not just energy independence, but energy dominance, and to hold those accountable once and for all and include them as adversarial nations. With that, I yield back.
We'll open up for questions now. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. McCarthy, Scalise, and Stefanik have all voted in favor of this before. You said you'd like to stop this in the Republican House. But what happens if they put it on the floor again and they pass it with the faction of the caucus that supports Ukraine aid with Democrats? Is this something you've talked to them about, and how would you plan to prevent that in the next Congress?
Well, I've been very open and honest. There's a few of us standing up here that have voted no to every single penny to go to Ukraine, and I'm one of them. I voted no from the beginning, and I'll continue to vote no. There's also been a change within our conference. There was 1, 2, 3 or 4. There's just a few of us that voted no from the beginning, but each spending bill that came through, our numbers grew. So you've heard Leader McCarthy say publicly that he doesn't see a very good odds for much funding for Ukraine going forward in a Republican-controlled conference. The American people are who we represent, and I can tell you right now, my district, Georgia 14, is not interested in continuing to fund a war in Ukraine and defending Ukraine's border while our border is being invaded every single day. Yes, sir.
Does pulling back U.S. support for Ukraine send a poor message, not just to Putin, but also to Chairman Xi in China, who is, of course, contemplating invading Taiwan? What message would that send on the part of the United States if we were to pull back?
I believe when America invests in itself and we strengthen our border and we strengthen our military and we show the world that we're very, very focused on protecting our nation, our sovereignty, and our freedoms and our borders and the American people, we signal strength to the rest of the world. You see, the real problem that we are telling the world right now is with the withdrawal in Afghanistan is that we tucked and run. And what we're telling the world right now by choosing to invest in a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia while ignoring other situations in other countries in the world is we're telling the world that we're more of interested in a money laundering scheme. And maybe we're interested in energy, the business of energy, than we really are about security. So I believe when America invests in ourselves and we care about the American people and our tax dollars, we'll grow our strength economically. We will grow our strength at our border and not allow the Mexican cartels to control the border, sending across human trafficking and drugs that are killing the American people. But when we invest in ourselves, we're telling the rest of the world and the world leaders we're not going to be used anymore. And the American people are sick and tired of being used. Yes.
On the position of leaders, you guys have a lot of leverage right now when it comes to McCarthy, especially. Is your message to leaders do not bring up Ukraine aid next year? Are you saying it's a condition for your support of their leadership?
I'm not saying it's a condition. I'm speaking on behalf of my district and what most Americans feel. I don't see a connection there at all. we're doing what we know is right, and that's what we'll continue to do. I don't know if anyone else wants to answer on that.
I mean, we each only have one vote. We don't dictate what goes on in the conference. What I would hope for is regular order, and that we get away from the things that Pelosi is doing, such as attaching disaster relief for Florida to creating a disaster in Ukraine. It's just immoral and despicable for her to do that. And I would hope that our own leadership doesn't do that. And if they are going to ask us to vote on that, give us an independent, separate vote on one subject.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, I saw your question in the back. We're at the,
Yes, quick question. A lot of you mentioned the fentanyl crisis that is happening, but most fentanyl comes from people crossing the border who are United States citizens, not necessarily immigrants. What is your response to that?
I would ask for where's your proof on that, because that's not what we've been shown. That's not what, when we go to the border and we're speaking with Border Patrol agents, when we're there on the ground, that is not at all what we're being told. So I'm going to push back on your I'm sorry, the Cato Institute is not the Border Patrol. There's a big difference there. I'm sorry, is the Cato down there securing our border and stopping illegal aliens and human trafficking and drug trafficking? I'm sorry, you're going to have to get a direct source. And when you bring the Border Patrol in here and want to quote that, then we may take you seriously. But we're not taking the Cato Institute seriously. Yes, ma'am.
So you're bringing this forward in a privilege resolution, which is interesting because your colleagues have done that a lot this year. So far, none of their privilege resolutions have been able to get to the floor because the committees have dealt with all of them. And of course, they voted them down because Democrats control it. My question for you, are you planning on introducing this next year when Republicans will have control of the committees and it could potentially actually see floor action?
Thank you. Those are good questions. And so first of all, let's go with the first part of your question. If they choose to vote this down, that's going to tell the American people, no, you're not allowed to know what is happening with your money, the money that you work hard for every single day, the money that you follow the law and you pay your taxes to the government to trust with your money. They'll be telling them no. So that'll be a signal to the American people, and I think the American people deserve to know that. And then for next year, absolutely. I'll introduce this resolution again, but I'll also be calling for a full audit. That's what we want. We want to audit Ukraine, and that needs to happen. We voted no to send money over there, but we also are going to audit what's happening over in Ukraine. So yes. Yes, sir.
Congressman, what is the connection between FTX and the Ukrainians? Do you suspect money was laundered, for instance, from the U.S. Treasury through Ukraine and back to dirty hands here in the U.S. through FTX or other players?
I think we're all suspecting a lot of bad things with FTX that you just mentioned. I know it's under investigation with the SEC, and I think you'll see a lot more investigations going on into that. So that's something that needs to be sorted out, investigated. You know, there needs to be a lot of subpoenas given there, and we look forward to finding out what happened there. Yes.
Do you have the support from Kevin McCarthy and the leadership for this resolution? Have you talked to them about it?
I let him know I was introducing it earlier today. Yes. I said, I'm having a press conference at 4, and he said, okay. Tia?
I just want to follow up on the FTX thing. Do you believe that Ukraine sent money back to the Democratic Party of its federal aid dollars through FTX? Is that what you believe?
I don't know what happens, but it sure does look bad. This guy, he's got 3 letters like I do. What's his name? Sam Bankman Fried. Yeah. So he's apparently going to file bankruptcy. He was the second largest donor to Democrats this cycle. He was in charge of the cryptocurrency fund in Ukraine through the national bank there. And the question is did USAID dollars go into that fund? That's a very real question that we need to know. And I believe a lot of these documents, if they're able to hand them over, and they should hand them over, what would they have to hide? Everyone deserves to know where the money is going. We definitely want to know if any U.S. taxpayer dollars went into that fund. And then after it went into the fund, did it go back into his pocket for him to donate to political candidates? And I think that those are the kind of questions that we would want to ask regardless of whatever political party it is, because that just shouldn't happen. That should never happen. And I want to give anybody else a chance to answer questions on that.
So one of the things I just wanted to
Right here.
Sorry. One of the things I just wanted to add to this is that we have to look at connecting the dots here. Every single person, all of my colleagues, as well as for everyone in the press floor, is American taxpayers. We deserve to know where our money is being spent and where it's being utilized. But we also have to recognize the fact that both times that Russia has actually violated the sovereignty of Ukraine, who was in office? Joe Biden. And why didn't they in 2014, when the Russians came across, declare a violation of the 94 Budapest Memorandum? That the Federation of Russia, the United States, Ukraine, and the UK and Northern Ireland is a part of as a signatory. It was a non-nuclear proliferation agreement that basically recognized their sovereignty if they got rid of their nuclear weapons. Why are we not utilizing international treaties and agreements that's been violated as a mechanism for sanctioning? Why are we continuing to allow this to grow and become some, warmongering military-industrial complex buildup that only benefits who? Not the American people. So I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked on this, but the real answer is this. Americans deserve transparency of where their money goes. That is our job as elected officials. And when I actually was on the conference floor, and my colleagues will tell you, that's one of the questions I asked the leadership. Will you commit to 100% audit of Ukrainian funds so that the American taxpayers know where their money is going? Thank you.
And thank you for your service, Mr. Mills.
I've been in Ukraine many times.
One more question.
Congresswoman, has your leadership promised you that there will be an investigation into the treatment of January 6th defendants next year?
Oh, that was a question I'd asked in conference, and I had asked that to Steve Scalise. I'd asked him if we could, if he would support investigations into Nancy Pelosi's handling of security at the Capitol on January 6th. I believe that one's really important. I also, in that question, I also asked him about if we can, if he would support investigations into the treatment of pre-trial January 6th defendants. That's something that's also very important. And he said that he would support it through the committees, so that each committee, the committees assigned to that would be handling it. So I look forward to talking with Jamie Comer, who will be our chairman on oversight, and talking with him about investigating that. I think I'll let Matt, if you want to address that one for judiciary.
Yeah, I think hope springs eternal in the new Congress, that we'll be able to get a lot of these questions answered. Last time we were in the majority, Republicans did not send a single subpoena on matters that concerned us at the Department of Justice and at the FBI, and I've been told that the times they are changing.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.